Okay, so could you repeat the first question for me?
Absolutely. So the first question I asked was this. When you describe Adam being placed in Eden as a kind of brought into the church, what do you see as the essential defining feature of the church in that analogy? Is it God's presence, the hearing of the covenant word, human obedience, or maybe something else?
That's a wonderful question. That's a very good question. So what constitutes a church? Uh, we must understand what constitutes church to know why the Garden of Eden symbolizes the church. First, the church is the place where God dwells, and this is mentioned in Kings chapter 8 and Deuteronomy chapter 12. The temple of God, the church, is a place for God's dwelling. And then we see from Genesis chapter 2 that God dwelled in the Garden of Eden. So this is the first proof that the Garden of Eden was the church. Second, the church is where the word of the covenant is declared. And in the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam a command not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So this
Uh,
command represents that God's word was declared in the Garden of Eden, which is the another aspect that constitutes a church. So I think these two elements are sufficient conditions that constitute the Garden of Eden as the church.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. So you're basically saying that for Eden to symbolize the church, it's those two core elements that matter. First, it's the place of God's dwelling presence. And second, it's the place where the covenant word is given and heard. That really helps clarify the analogy. Now, I follow up with another question. Given that understanding, how do you see that same pattern of God's dwelling and word showing up in the journey of the Israelites and then for believers today? Feel free to share how you connect those dots.
So just in the same way that the Garden of Eden symbolizes the church, the wilderness the Israelites journeyed through for 40 years also represent the church. And because the Ark of the Covenant was always going ahead of them in 3 days, so it means that it signifies their the guidance of God's word over the Israelites, and God was with them. God was with them, the Israelites, by leading them through the pillars of cloud and fire. So they were always with God's presence. So the wilderness they journeyed through also represents the church. And in this church, and on the Mount Sinai, God declared the Ten Commandments, which is the fundamental element of the covenant. So are these two are the proof that the wilderness too was the church for the Israelites.
Absolutely. That's a great connection. So, just as Eden was that initial space of God's presence and covenant word, the wilderness journey becomes another church in motion, so to speak, where God's presence is with them and his covenant law is given. And that definitely sets a pattern for believers today, where the church is the place we continue to experience God's dwelling and receive his word. So, that makes total sense.